Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
That you need to go against the grain. You need to not be afraid to take risks in life. When we would be in an airport and there was the moving sidewalks, David, I would have her go down the opposite direction of the sidewalk because that's how life is. It's always coming at you. It's always telling you you can't do this. Little girl, you're going to get hurt. Little girl, you're on the wrong side. That's life. Until she finally said, Dad, I'm too old to do this, I had her walk down the opposite direction of the moving sidewalk.
That's our guest this week, author, ace real estate developer, and ultramarathoner Frank McKinney. In addition to starting a whole slew of successful real estate ventures, Frank has also developed many self-sustaining villages in Haiti, providing homes and schools for over 1,300 residents. We'll hear all about this amazing man and his work in this first installment of a two-part interview. So say hello now to the founder of the Special Fathers Network and the host of the Dad to Dad podcast, a man who has literally just bicycled across the country. Here's David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast presented by the Special Fathers Network, a Dad to Dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Thank you to those who supported the 21st Century Dad's on a Ride 2023 campaign, which was a 3,000 plus mile bicycle race from Oceanside, California to Annapolis, Maryland. I was one of the 4 racers, and it took us 7 days, 19 hours, and 10 minutes to go from coast to coast. Special thanks to the following donors for contributing $1,000 or more in alphabetical order. They are Kim Duchessois, Jim Duran, Chaz Ebert, John Guido, Horizon Therapeutics, Scott Marcotte, Damian Navarro, Dick Reck, Barb and Glenn Reed, Rotary Club of Chicago, Don Stadler, Nick Dupinka Dolny, and UBS Financial Services. If you've not yet contributed, please do so by visiting 21stcenturydads.org. Your tax-deductible contribution will help keep our programs free to all concerned.
So let's hear this intriguing conversation now between Frank McKinney and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Frank McKinney of Delray Beach, Florida, a modern-day Renaissance man. Frank is known as a real estate artist who created and sold 44 oceanfront mansions on spec with an average price of $14 million. A self-described philanthro-capitalist, Frank has built 30 self-sustaining villages in Haiti during the last 20 years, providing 13,000 plus children and their families with homes, schools, clinics, community centers, churches, renewable food and clean water, as well as the means to support themselves. Frank is also a best-selling author, 8 books and counting, an actor, and a keynote speaker. Physically, Frank has pushed himself and his body by racing in the Badwater 135 ultramarathon 12 times in the scorching summer heat in Death Valley, a race referred to by National Geographic as the world's toughest foot race. Frank, thank you for doing a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Well, I've done hundreds of podcasts, and when yours came across the desk that relates to fatherhood, the roles of men, the roles of grandfathers and fathers, I love talking about that because the happiest years of my life have been raising my only child, my daughter. I never get a chance to talk about that. We talk about all the other stuff you just said. We always go into that, and I love doing that, and we'll touch on that. But man, my little girl, who's not little anymore, she's 24, is everything to me. So thank you for having me.
You and your wife, Nilsa, have been married for 33 years. You are the proud parents of daughter Laura, 24, who's a graduate of Penn State University, who lives in New York City and is founder of Strata Brand, a public relations and special events company. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
My background, I'm just a corn-fed country boy from Indiana. I grew up in Carmel, Indiana. I'm the oldest of 6. My father was a banker. My mother was a school teacher for the first 2 children, and then she was a stay-at-home mom. I went to 4 high schools in 4 years, and yes, or no, my father was not in the military. It was because I was asked to leave one after the other. I finally graduated from a high school that was run by Benedictine monks. Like I went to class and my teachers wore hoods and robes tied together with ropes. It was a reform school. I spent 7 different stints in juvenile detention between the ages of 14 and 17. I realized when I was 18, you don't go to juvenile detention. You stop going to kindergarten, you go to the big house. So I kind of turned things around there. And I hopped on a plane with a $50 bill and a one-way plane ticket when I was 18 from Indiana, Carmel, Indiana, for the sunny beaches of South Florida.
Well, that is an amazing start. So let's just agree that you were not academic oriented when you were a young person.
If I go back now, I don't know if it was that I was academic oriented, meaning I had the capability. There was nothing that interested me except for 2 subjects, actually 3. One would be creative writing. I loved creative writing and writing in general. I loved math because I knew someday I was going to be counting a lot of money and I needed to be good at math. And I loved my jewelry class. I loved making jewelry. The others, I just didn't really care much for. Thank God for those first 2. Because David, without those, I would have had a 0.8 GPA.
Okay. Well, thanks for your humility. So let's go back to your dad. You mentioned he's a banker, and I know that you come from an athletic family, and I'm wondering if there's some more that we should know about your dad.
Well, my father was a 3-time Olympic medalist. He won one of each composition, a gold, a silver, and a bronze medal in the 60 Olympics. And he held the world record in the backstroke that he set in 1960 that stood for 22 years, which is amazing. At a very young age, he was a superstar. And when he came home to Indiana as a gold medalist, silver medalist, bronze medalist, I mean, that man walked on water. And not just on that side of the family from my father, but from my mother's side, my grandfather played for the Chicago Cardinals that became the Chicago Bears. So we were a very athletic family. And me growing up, I was, after a little deviation into getting into trouble, I was a tennis instructor, a tennis pro, and I played competitively on the circuit. So yeah, my dad was a huge influence on athletics being an important part of my life. And I think it was athletics, David, that pulled me out from that delinquency, that tendency to get in trouble, because I really leaned into that ability to play. You name the sport, you put the ball in my hand, I could do it. I didn't ever want to box, but other than that, I could play everything.
That's fabulous. So I'm sort of curious now, how would you describe your relationship with your dad?
Well, my dad's been gone since 1992, and he was killed in a midair plane crash on 9/11/92, if you could believe that. 9/11. Our 9/11 in our family is a rough day. Not the 9/11, but a 9/11, the McKinney family 9/11. So, we're talking 30 years now, 31 years. I will be honest, it was very strained. I'm Frank McKinney III. He's Frank McKinney Jr. He was a stereotypical banker, 16 of the same suits in his closet with 16 of the same wingtip shoes and the white shirt. And we butted heads. I mean, we could do well for 2 or 3 days. And then after that, very strong-willed man, and he raised a very strong-willed son. And I have no regrets over my relationship because I always tried to mend the differences all the way up until 2 days before he hopped on that plane and passed in that crash. I was always trying to mend our relationship.
Yeah, well, tragic end to his life, very abrupt. And how old would he have been back in 1992?
He was 53.
Wow.
Yeah. I used to think that was old. This year, I will be 7 years older than him. And yet, the things he taught me, I remember being in trouble often as a teenager, and he would sit me down in my room. Now, back in the, let's say this would be maybe the late 70s or the 80s, I'm in trouble. Back then, we have earbuds, plural. Back then, you had one jack that you could plug into your stereo and put into one ear. So I had longer hair back then too. And I remember, like, here we go again. I'm going to hear this speech about, you need to turn your life around. And I'd put the jack in my ear and I'd turn on my heavy metal music or whatever. But David, one ear was open and one ear was listening to what my father was saying. And the things he told me, organization is the key to success. It's one of the chapters in one of my books. Frank, or he called me Mickey. Mickey, it's 98% of you is off the charts. Your ability to succeed in this business called life, anything, anywhere is off the charts. It's the 2% that's going to get you in trouble. And man, those things just resonate with me. The lessons I heard through the ear that I didn't know was open, that didn't have the little earbud in it, were priceless. And a lot of those I actually kind of regurgitate in Aspire, my book.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. I know that each of us sort of rebels at a certain age from what our parents have to say. They just seem like they're the stupidest people on the planet. And I don't think you know it at the time, but you can only look backwards and connect those dots or understand, they love you. They were looking out for your best interest, and they're just concerned, right, that you weren't utilizing your God-gifted talents. And it's too bad that he didn't live long enough to see some of the things that you're able to accomplish. That's my way of thinking about it.
And if you were to lay me out on a couch and you were a therapist, why do you wear the clothes you wear? Why do you wear your hair the way you wear your hair? I think you can turn the dial all the way back to those conversations where I was just screaming for his attention. I wanted his attention. He was a high-profile guy and a workaholic in Indiana. I admired the high profile, so therefore, I kind of wanted that in my life, but I did not want the workaholic. I didn't want to leave my children or child the way he would leave us. I don't mean leave us, but he wouldn't pay attention to the six of us like I wanted a dad to do. And so part of the persona that has been created over the years is kind of anti Frank McKinney Jr., the way that he looks, and also very much anti the way that I chose to spend time with my daughter. I'm not knocking my father. Either you absorb tendencies and traits and DNA from your parents and you amplify them. In other words, they're even greater than what you were exposed to, or you go the complete opposite way. I amplified his success genes, of course, and his work ethic, but I ran the opposite way when it came to spending time with my family, meaning I wanted to spend more time with my family.
Yeah, well, another way I think about it is the pendulum swings one way, like you were describing with your dad, and now it's swinging the other way.
Yes.
You're emulating a lot of the good things that your dad did, and maybe you can live vicariously through some of the things that you didn't want to repeat yourself in your own fathering.
This is very true.
Laura is the beneficiary of all that. I think she's the beneficiary.
Yep. Thank you.
So let's talk about some other father influencers before we move on. And I'm sort of curious to know what, if any, relationship you had with your grandfathers, first on your dad's side and then on your mom's side.
Both of them passed pretty early, David. Both my grandfathers were gone by the time I was about 10. But the fact that I was old enough to understand that my grandfather, my dad's side, started out as a bank messenger, not even in an automobile. He was on a bicycle, never graduated beyond 7th grade. And he went from a bank messenger riding around in Indianapolis, to being a bank president, to being the chairman of this bank. And he was also the Democratic National Chairman for Harry Truman. I mean, talk about a Horatio Alger story. Until he passed, at 10, you're so impressionable. In his house, he was royalty. I mean, you were in the presence of royalty, but not a snobbery. He was a very humble man. My mom's side, my grandfather, same thing. They passed around the same time before I was 10. He was very quiet. When he would recount the stories of his athletic career, I thought, man, this is something, and that got me into tennis. I wanted to be a competitive tennis player. Freud and other psychiatrists say that our core personalities are formed between the ages of 4 and 12. So who David is, who Frank is, and who the listener is, in all likelihood, if you're over 12, you are who you are for the rest of your life. Your core personality has been formed already. And it was in those early years sitting with those men, including my father, that formed my core personality.
Yeah, well, it sounds like there's some good family roots there, right? That's what I hear you saying. With your dad's dad, who was very accomplished, brought himself up from what most people would call the mailroom, but maybe even outside the mailroom in his day, right? If he's a bank messenger on a bicycle, all the way up to the C-suite. And, the success that they had in various aspects of their lives. So you had some amazing role models. So it's unfortunate that they didn't live longer, but that you did get to know them, right? That's a blessing that you got to know your grandparents.
Yes.
I'm wondering if there's any father figures, an individual or two that stand out that influenced you, either as a young guy or perhaps as a young adult for that matter.
One of my primary mentors in life for 20 years was a gentleman by the name of Rich DeVos. And for those of you who don't know who Rich is, he was the co-founder of Amway. He was the 65th richest person in the world with the time of his death. I don't say that to impress you. I say that to impress upon you that a man like that, who had those kind of riches, was the one who taught me how to dovetail my professional and my spiritual highest calling. He was the one who taught me that God blesses us materially for a reason other than merely to put more cars in our garage, clothes in our closet, and food in our pantry. I cherished every time, every moment I got to spend with him. He would be as close as I would have come to a surrogate father or a father figure.
Yeah, well, I didn't know him, but knew of him. It's hard not to, if you're in business, not to be aware of the Amway story and the amazing success, not only from a financial perspective, but he stood out in the corporate world, again, not knowing him personally, but just knowing of him because of his outspoken nature about his spirituality, right? He wore it on his sleeve, not evangelizing, but just being a man of deep faith and trying to connect his wealth and his values. That's what my understanding of Rich DeVos was. So you and Nilsa have been married for 33 years, and I'm sort of curious to know, how did the two of you meet?
I was still a tennis instructor, just getting into flipping crack houses. Not crack foundation, but crack cocaine. These were drug houses. And I was doing these $50,000 to $100,000 houses. We had an office in the same building. Now, Nilsa, mind you, was an interior designer, very well established, doing the inside of yachts and jets, personal jets, and of course, mansions. I had bought this really rough house in a really bad part of town. And I thought, this is a way to get to know this woman who's way out of my league. And so I saw her and I asked her out a bunch of times. She said, no, I'm not interested. I would come into the office in my tennis shorts, David. I was still teaching tennis, putting food on the table. So back in the 80s, tennis shorts were really short, and she was dressed up like a princess or a queen or a movie star. And she just kept saying no. So finally I said, okay, you know what? And I'm 24 years old. I said, I need an interior designer on this house I just bought. Could you take a look at it? She says, she's very stoic. She's just very serious. And she still is pretty much to this day. She says, listen, I'll look at it, but I need $500 retainer. You have to understand, back then when I'm doing crack houses, $500 is basically my whole budget to renovate the house. It's really close to everything I set aside to do. So I said, okay, I gave her the retainer. She gets in the car. Matter of fact, she drove. She wanted to be in control. We get to the house. She turns over to her locks. She locks the doors. I hear them lock down because it was in a rough neighborhood. She turned to me and said, you don't need an interior designer. You need a bulldozer. And I was kind of a jerk back then. I said, hey, babe, well, okay, that's fine. Let's go get some drinks or something. I don't date my clients. Well, then you're fired. Fine. I still won't go out with you, but I'm going to keep your $500 because you took my time to come out here. Like, man, I am losing all around. Finally, after another couple weeks of just not giving up, she said, I will go to lunch with you. And I can tell you that on August 5th, 1987, 8587, for everybody listening, you now know my passcode to everything. We went out on our first date, and it was just so wonderful. I was like a kid in a candy store. I was so nervous. You got to understand, back then, I had huge 1980s hair. I was driving a Mercedes 450 SL where the whole back seat was speakers. It was all speakers. And I come screeching around the corner with some Van Halen blasting, and I was 30 minutes late. She was on her way out the door. She was going to leave. Something made her, stay and turn around. And, the rest has been a wonderful, in Aspire, I talk about being able to marry your guardian angel. It's a chapter in my book. There's a whole section that talks about your love life. And being able to marry your guardian angel was one of the greatest blessings God ever gave me. Because without her in my life, I can assure you, I would be living in a trailer park in West Virginia, smelling like motor oil, chewing tobacco, married to the bearded lady in the circus. That's how important she was to me.
Yeah, I love that story. Thanks for sharing. I do remember, I can't remember which book it was, but she did describe being married to you as a roller coaster ride and being like on a SpaceX.
Yeah, it's a funny description. It's an Aspire. It's something like being on a roller coaster inside of a spaceship, inside of a blender on high speed. And then they turn off gravity, right? And the whole thing just goes careening off into the universe. Like that's a daily existence. There's this chapter in Aspire that talks about the significance of a significant other. That's the title of the chapter. And, you know, in life and in business, who you choose to spend your life with, unless you're a hermit, you're going to spend your life with somebody or part of your life with somebody's, plural. And her influence on my life, as I said, that was a long description I'd probably be dead instead of in that trailer park married to the bearded lady. So, yeah, I mean, it's just, we've had our fair share, of course, over 33 years of pressure, but there's another chapter that says relationship pressure creates diamonds. So either in a relationship, the pressure that is inevitable, the valleys that are inevitable, is going to crush the union or it's going to create the diamond. And we chose to allow it to create the diamonds.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. So let's switch gears. You know that the podcast is directed at families, specifically dads raising children with special needs. And I'm wondering, do you or Nilsa have any connection to the disability or special needs community?
Well, we do. There's a organization in South Florida called the Miracle League. And I've emceed a couple of their events. It is an organization that is a baseball league for kids with special needs. And seeing these kids go out on this baseball field and play, because they don't get to play. They're not invited to play. They can't play on a regular team. And the disabilities range from wheelchair bound to just, slightly disabled. Matter of fact, the slightly disabled will help the wheelchair bound. And watching the couple, the Cadells that founded that Miracle League you say you count your blessings because, your child isn't like that, but these parents and the love that you see on that field is unlike anything I've witnessed until I get to heaven. I mean, it's just the purest form of love that I've ever seen in my life. And so being connected with that has been very special to both of us.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Miracle League, the concept is in a lot of different communities around the U.S., providing youth typically with special needs, intellectual and physical disability, with an opportunity to engage in sports, baseball being, one of those. And it's very inclusive, right?
Oh,
You're sort of getting into very fertile territory, right, as far as witnessing unconditional love.
yep.
The innocence of these individuals and the hearts, right? Just huge hearts. It's really special, but thanks for sharing.
Sure.
We'll be back with more of the conversation on the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast in just a few moments. But first, this quick message. Please help 21st century dads gather research on families raising children with special needs by having them complete the Special Fathers Network Early Intervention Parents Survey. A link to the survey can be found in the show notes. As a token of our appreciation, each person, mom or dad, who completes the survey will receive a Great Dad coin. Thank you. Now, back to the conversation.
I'm going to switch gears and talk about what you've identified as your 5 life aspirations, and then try to discuss each of these. I don't know if this would be in the order that you might rank them, but family being one, the real estate experience that you've had as a real estate artist. Third is some of the physical challenges that you've been able to pursue, mostly around ultramarathons, the Badwater 135 specifically. You've done some amazing work overseas in the name of the Caring House Project Foundation in Haiti. And then I'd like to talk about the books, not all 8 of them, but pick a few of them that I'm more familiar with and take a little bit deeper dive. So you mentioned that you're a father, you have an adult daughter, and family being one of the most important aspects. You've already touched on that, drafting off of your own experience with your dad and your grandfathers, Is there anything else you'd like to say about the importance of families?
There really is. I don't know how much time we have, but I really think it's important that we spend a lot of time on this topic, not just because it's really this is what it's about, dads. So I didn't have a great family relationship. Let's just leave it at that. So I wanted what I didn't really have as a child. That's why it's one of my 5 aspirations. And we waited 8 years to have our daughter because I wanted to be in a position, David, to take her to a park at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday and not worry about a boss barking at me to get back to work. I want to be financially secure so that I could take the time necessary to be with my daughter the way maybe I wasn't with my father. So let's fast forward to having her, and then she goes to school. Her first day of school, I walk her to school. It was very special. It was just something that we lived 8 blocks from the school. Her legs are tiny. She's 4 years old or 5 years old at the time. And it takes us quite a long time to walk that far because her little steps are quite small. David, the happiest years of my life, for 10 years, from pre-kindergarten to 8th grade, I walked my daughter to school every single day. 1,652 consecutive walks to school. Now, I was sick a couple times and I was out of town, but my wife walked her on the days when I was unable to, meaning my daughter never sat in the backseat of a car for 10 years to go to school. That streak and those times together resulted in my young reader fantasy novel, Dead Fred Flying Lunchboxes in the Good Luck Circle. It was such cherished time. So when we would build these villages in Haiti, which we'll get to in a minute, I brought my daughter to those villages starting when she was 6 years old. I wanted to make sure she saw, because we were doing well. She's an only child. I saw a lot of rich, spoiled kids in South Florida. Me exposing her to the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere and how children live there. I mean, their soccer balls were skulls. They were kicking around skulls on a soccer field. That base that I gave her, my wife and I gave her, she's not a spoiled child. She did very well at Penn State as president of the whole student body. She was a great leader. The last thing about family I will tell you is I always taught my daughter that you need to go against the grain. You need to not be afraid to take risks in life. And in one of my books, I believe it was the Aspire book, I talked about when we would be in an airport and there was the moving sidewalks, David, I would have her go down the opposite direction of the sidewalk because that's how life is. It's always coming at you. It's always telling you can't do this. Little girl, you're going to get hurt. Little girl, you're on the wrong side. Why are you over here? You're getting bumped into. That's life. Until she finally said, Dad, I'm too old to do this. I had her walk down the opposite direction of the moving sidewalk. It stuck with her. She's not afraid to take risks. She's not afraid to be ridiculed. She's not afraid to tell, women just don't do that kind of thing. So family and raising her and spending all that quality time with her, I can check that off. I could die tomorrow and say, of the 5 aspirations that I wanted and I aspired to have, that materialized.
Yeah, well, I love that story about walking Laura to school for 10 years. With very few exceptions. And you didn't use this word, but the way I think about it is that you were present, right? That's what is one of the tenets of the 21st Century Dads Foundation, is that we focus on 4 areas that dads could be present: physically, emotionally, spiritually, and I guess what the state cares about is financially present. Now, the money is one thing, but those other 3 things, physical, emotional, and spiritual presence, is what a lot of kids are striving for or lack in their relationship with their dads. And that's what I heard you emphasizing. You were physically present.
Every single one of those walks, David, I was present in those 3 ways. I had a little self-imposed rule there. I didn't bring my phone, because I used to see back in the early days, like this is when guys would walk around with like a single little, whatever, those little things in their ears. And I thought that was just the stupidest thing. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be talking to the air when I'm walking my daughter to school. So, man, that I'm glad you put that on the top of the list, because it is on the top of my list of things that I aspired to accomplish in my life. And I continue to accomplish it every day that I'm with my family.
Yeah, well, my hat's off to you for the commitment. So most people, at least from a business standpoint, would know about your real estate experiences. started out at a pretty humble level, in your own words, buying and selling crack houses. Well, let's just say that they were inexpensive properties, right? If not actual crack houses. And I'm wondering, what was it that propelled you from wanting to be somebody in the real estate world to becoming this, I think, nationally known, world-renowned real estate artist, and taking the risk of building these spec homes, not one or two, not a dozen, but close to 4 dozen spec homes of consequential value? I mean, that's just like way over the top. It didn't go from crack house to $50 million house overnight. So describe for our listeners the trajectory there.
Yeah, so for 5 years, I didn't do a house worth more than $100,000, and I became very good at the craft of real estate, not the business. The business will follow. Sacrifice your bottom line for your reputation. Build your reputation first, and the bottom line will follow. And that's my saying. It's something that I was keen on. I would sacrifice margin for my reputation, even with the crack houses. They were the nicest little crack houses on the block when I got done with them. And after 5 years, I realized I was really good at this thing called real estate. My margins were increasing. Even the notoriety for doing little crappy houses in bad neighborhoods, we were starting to gather. And so my therapist today, this is maybe many years ago, said, Frank, you're addicted to, like, the things that got me in trouble were the obvious things, but you weren't addicted to those things. You were addicted to the excitement associated with those things. The drugs and the alcohol and the stealing cars and the holding up the convenience stores. You didn't like any of that stuff. You loved the excitement. When you build a $15 million house without a buyer in mind on speculation, and you don't know if you're going to be eating at Ruth Chris Steakhouse or out of a dumpster, that is very exciting. It is very, I knew I was alive every single day for the 30 plus years that we were building high-end spec homes. The second thing I got to satisfy was the artist in me. So I made, again, this is video only or audio only. You can't see. Many people think I'm in a band. You must sing, play an instrument, or do you sculpt? Do you paint? I can't do any of those things, but I love the artistry associated with creating three-dimensional art that people can live in, and pushing the envelope when it came to the amenities, because I now know what the ultra wealthy want before they know they want it. And that's what I talk about in my books as being my professional highest calling, a gift God gave me to do something a little bit better than most. Not better than everybody, but better than most. Everybody has a professional highest calling. You'll read about that in Aspire. So as the zero started to add up, I did go from 50,000 to 2 million. There was nothing in between, because I realized, this thing called real estate, I have a knack for it, and why bother at $500,000 or $1 million? I convinced my wife, let's take the risk, let's do it, and we did. The most expensive house we ever did on spec was a $50 million house. So I went from a $50,000 crack house to a $50 million house on spec. For those of you who don't know what spec is, that's building a house without a buyer in mind. So you build it, and like the Field of Dreams, you hope they will come, and they have, for over 30 years. So that has satisfied. I dial back to a half an hour ago when I talked about Freud saying that our core personalities are formed by the age of 4. If my core personality was one that was predisposed to risk and excitement and thrills and being addicted to those things, well, I got to satisfy that I do a lot of talks at detention centers, at rehab facilities. Not that I've ever been to one, and I say, look, guys, you've got a special synapse in your brain that got you in here. I say special. I say it's a gift. Redirect what we refer to, not just society, but we refer to as self-destructive tendencies into something constructive. You don't have to change. Just redirect or reignite something that's been buried or oppressed for a long time. That's what I got to do with the real estate. I have not changed. The same person you see here is the guy you saw in high school. Only I found a constructive outlet for what was a destructive tendency. And listen, I don't want to be a starving artist. I understand the numbers associated with making a profit. I retired for a while. Now I just came out of retirement last year to do this beautiful artistry in North Carolina. But that 30 plus years was quite a ride.
Yeah, well, I wish we could spend more time on that, but it's very unique, right, to be able to do what you've done and at the level that you did for the length of time that you did. And I know that there's a lot more that somebody could learn about through the website that you have and through the books that you've written about. So the third of your life aspirations after family and the real estate work that you've done is this way over the top commitment to what's known as Badwater 135, 135-mile Death Valley, middle of the summer, one of America's, if not the world's, most challenging foot races. And as somebody who's done a fair number of marathons, got my ass kicked last year trying to do the Keys 100 from Key Largo to Key West, I have a very high level of appreciation for the level of commitment that it takes just to do an ultramarathon, let alone come back not once, not twice, but 12 different times. And I'm wondering, what was it that attracted you to start marathoning and then ratchet that up to ultramarathoning?
I think it goes back to even the earliest of days, being a maintenance worker on a golf course and earning $4 an hour, and then being a tennis instructor and earning $100,000 a year as a 19-year-old. There never was any limits for me. I never believed in limits. And then I realized, well, tennis, maybe there is a limit to how much I can make, so I need to move into the real estate business. And I was encouraged to do so by my tennis students. And then there was really no limit. Like we designed a $135 million house once. We never built it, but sold the land underneath it. So when it came to that race, David, the very short story is I was vacationing in Death Valley because I wanted to be in the hottest place in the world. My wife didn't even know, we were going until I said, honey, I booked a vacation in a 5-star hotel where there were scorpions on the floor. And we're going to go check out what's referred to as the hottest place in the world, Death Valley, California, in July. I get there. I'm a fast twitch runner. I run I was at that time running a 10K in around 40 minutes. And I decided to go out for my little 6-mile run. When I say I was crawling back to the room with my eyes rolled back in my head from heat stroke, I'll save you a long story, but my wife, had to basically bring me back to life by taking me down to the little general store, buying Gatorade and a banana. And when the clerk saw me, he said, you better get back out there. You're in last place. You're going to miss the cutoff. You're not going to make it. I was already delirious, David. Sir, I'm sorry. What are you talking about? Yes, I'm flush in the face, but I'm in last place in what? He says, you're not in the Badwater Ultramarathon? Long story short, I had booked my vacation during the Badwater Ultramarathon, and I had never heard the word ultramarathon uttered. I didn't know there was such a thing. And I said, you mean there are people out there running in this 135 miles nonstop? The hair on my arm still stands up. He says, yes, you can go down to the ranger station and buy a video called Running on the Sun, which was a documentary. Like a child watching cartoons 100 times over, I watched that video. A year to the date, this happened in 2004 in July. I was at the start line in 2005. I had hired a coach. I got the mandatory, race under my belt. Back then, you only needed one 100-mile race. And that starting gun went off. I was enamored. I still am enamored. I still dream about it. So the first time I went because it was Badwater. And each time I went back was for a different reason. It was the people, it was the place. What I got out of that spiritually, I couldn't get on any therapist couch or from any book. I know why a lot of the stories in the Bible are written. Most epiphanous stories in the Bible are written in and about the desert. And after my first race, David, in 05, 06, 07, I raced a bunch of times in a row. By the way, full disclosure, I failed to finish 5 of those 12. So I know what it's like to fail to finish. And my career took off because when you finish something like that, there really is nothing that's impossible. I was not a seasoned runner. I had never even run half a marathon before I ran a 100-mile qualifying race. So it just shows my coach got my mind right. You get the mind right and the body will follow. You get the mind right, the miles will follow. You get the mind right, the money will follow. And that was just a perfect example.
Yeah, well, I think what I heard you say as it relates to that first Badwater experience, you finished the event and it gives you a certain level of confidence that you didn't know you had, right? It sort of breaks down some of those mental barriers that you might have had in your own mind. And not like cocky, I can do anything, but I can relate to that, not because of my marathon experience, but I did do a bicycle ride from Santa Monica to Chicago over 3 weeks. It was 2,325 miles. I was 54 years old at the time, never had done any endurance bike riding. And most people would say, you shouldn't do that. You're going to get hurt or killed. I put a team together. We had a plan. And one thing led to the next, arriving 19 of the 21 days on schedule, only delayed twice, once by an electrical storm, once by fatigue. And we got the job done. And I found my voice, right, to talk more about the important role that fathers play in their children's lives, because we called it the Dad's Honor Ride. That was the very first of the now 4 Dad's Honor Rides that we've done. I can sort of relate to what you're saying, is that, there is a little bit of an addiction there. It's hard to describe. I know that some people would say, I don't understand why you do something like that. And there's a tagline out of, I think it's Harley Davidson, if I had to explain, you wouldn't understand. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
I could jump up on that for 30 seconds. When people would ask me that, they knew I was a little bit, I'm not going to say crazy, but willing to try things that were difficult. Why do you do this, Frank? Why do you? Because I can. That was my answer. Because there'll come a day, and that day is pretty much right now. I'm up for double knee replacement. I have 40,000 miles on my body. The day is here. I'm going to try maybe to be the first to finish Badwater with replaced knees. It will likely happen. I doubt it, but I never say never to anything. So going back, the first time was an accomplishment. Yes, the confidence went through the roof, but the experience, the rawness, you really get to know who you are out there. I miss that. That replacing that with something has been very difficult for me.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about Badwater, and we'll move on. There was one of these, what I think of as memorable experiences that you relate in one of the books. I think it was Aspire, where you were a mile short of the destination, right? You're like at mile marker 134, and there's just like no gas left in the tank. And you didn't want to be that guy who DNF'd with a mile to go. So pick the story up from there.
Well, I had actually fainted at mile 131. I passed out. I had never fainted in my life, even back when I was drinking and doing all sorts of stupid things. I never fainted. I never passed out. I went face first down into the pavement, crushed my front teeth, bloody nose, and I had to drive back down the hill because I felt it was something to do with altitude, because here we were at about 8,000 feet. Well, my blood had become so thick that my heart couldn't pump it to my brain. I was basically that dehydrated. I still had time left. There was a 48-hour cutoff, and this happened at like hour 40. So I went down, recouped a little bit. My crew, other than my wife, my crew that year was my family, my brothers and sisters. They were like, no, do not put him back up there. My wife said, I ain't going back home with him and listen to this for a whole nother year. We're going back. And sure enough, we start going at less than a mile an hour. You're allowed to have a crew member out there. So I was holding my wife's hand. At 134, I go down again. And I'm thinking, this is it. Like, I'm really out of it. And I ended up doing a crab claw. So I couldn't crawl with my head down because no blood would have gotten to me. I would have been passed out. I crawled, basically, a crab claw is, your head's up toward the sky. And I crab clawed my way to within 100 yards of the finish line, and then got up. And you're allowed to hold hands with your crew members. They can't assist you except to, be with you at the finish line. If you look closely at that finish picture, my wife, who's 5'1", my brother is 6'4", I'm holding their hands, but I'm actually like pushing down on their hands because I couldn't put any weight on my legs. Not that they carried me across the finish line, but boy, was I leaning on them. And it still was like my second or third fastest time. At a 48-hour cutoff, David, I was always, my average finish time was 44 hours. So I was always at the back of the pack. I'm not fast. But I didn't go to win. I went to survive, and I survived 7 out of 12 times.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. It's really miraculous. There's not too many people that can say that they've completed Badwater, let alone 7 Badwater races. You're up on a very high pedestal.
And that concludes this first part of the 2-part interview with Frank McKinney. Tune in next week to hear how Frank conceived of and started a village for over 1,000 Haitian residents. That's on the next Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.